Welcome to Off-Road Legends from Hot Cars, where we're going to be taking a deep dive on some of the most legendary four-wheel drive vehicles of all time. I'm Michael Van Runkle, and today our focus is on the iconic Porsche 959. Now you might be thinking, hold on, that's the world-beating supercar from the 1980s that had the top speed of like 211 miles an hour. And you're not wrong, but the 959 was actually developed originally with off-roading in mind. The head of Weissach at the time, M.S.R.P, intended the 959 to conquer Group B rally racing. This was the golden age of rally racing, with models like the Audi Quattro, Lancia S4, and can't think of a third. Porsche thought they could take on the world with a 959 supercar able to go off-roading. Development began with the 953, which was basically an all-wheel drive 911 that received little in the way of other mechanical upgrades. And then the 959 went like 20 years ahead of its time with radical aerodynamics, advanced modular adjustable suspension systems, a four-wheel drive drivetrain the likes of which Porsche had never previously worked on, and of course, some water cooling on the famous air-cooled flat six. We're gonna walk you all the way through the 959's development and tell you a little bit about the Paris-Dakar Rally, where the 959 would actually find some success after Group B was dismantled when it became just too deadly. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. Thanks. We have to start when talking about the 959 by just going over what makes the air-cooled 911 so awesome in the first place. It was an era when American cars that were looking for performance just upped the power output and paid little attention to how much weight they were gaining. The 911 kept the little, lightweight, air-cooled engine at the rear of the car, and though it had a tendency to get a little tail happy, by not using water cooling and by keeping horizontally opposed cylinders, Porsche was able to keep curb weights down in the 2,000 pound range. Bear in mind here, of course, that air cooling was completely outdated by the 1980s when Porsche would unveil the 959. In fact, the Porsche 924 and 928, which were front-engine, water-cooled, more GT-type cars, were supposed to replace the 911. But Porsche's die-hard fans decided to make such an uproar that the brand had to keep the flagship 911 going. Still, Porsche was facing some serious financial troubles even when they started developing the 959. And M.S.R.P intended this new project to sort of demonstrate the future potential for a car that nevertheless retained the rear-engined and air-cooled layout. But in the name of efficiency, power, and durability, the 959 did receive water-cooled heads on an air-cooled block, which allowed Porsche to add on 2 turbos instead of using the air-cooled 3.2-liter Carrera engine of the 953. Now, the 953 deserves some recognition in its own right, because it was basically this project where Porsche took a 3.2 Carrera and just threw parts at it, drove it until it broke, and then threw more parts at it, and then drove it until it broke, and you get the picture. But the 959 really started as a little bit more of a blank slate design, which allowed Porsche's famous engineering to take a massive leap forward in terms of performance potential. Probably the 953's greatest accomplishment was taking home an overall win at Dakar in 1984. Now, Dakar had only started in 1979, and it was a grueling race from Paris down into Algiers and then across Africa to Senegal's capital of Dakar. It was a very dangerous race. Estimates place deaths over 70 in the years to follow, and usually less than half of the entrants end up finishing the race. In fact, some years that figure is as low as 20%. That's not so great. And so when Porsche then entered the 959 in Dakar in 1985, all 3 cars actually ended up dropping out. They did not finish the race due to reliability concerns. So the engineers could work over the aerodynamics, suspension, and all-wheel drive traction all within the 911 platform and try to create what ended up being truly a world-beating supercar. Of course, the most important step in the development process was refining that engine that combined water cooling and air cooling. The Flat Six displaced 2,849 cc's and produced 450 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. It used a two-stage sequential turbo setup for low-end and high-end boost, 7 main bearings, titanium connecting rods, really a very advanced package that proved both durable and powerful. Rumor has it that Porsche actually detuned the engine when racing at Dakar for improved fuel economy because finding gas in the African deserts might have been a little bit difficult. The 959 that ended up being sold to customers had a 52.8 gallon gas tank. For context, that would probably cost something around $250 to fill up in the US today. The rest of the drivetrain consisted of a 6-speed manual with a dedicated low-range gear called Gelände, like G-Wagon, for those who speak German, which means off-road in English. That was a low-speed crawler gear. Then you could climb up through the rest of the gears, which sent power to all 4 wheels through a trick all-wheel drive system that, much like the later Porsche 964, allowed for full lock, meaning you could have a fully locked center differential, front differential, and rear differential, like a Jeep. Now, the drivers didn't have to worry about pressing individual buttons. They could select traction modes for ice, wet, dry, and fully locked. That's pretty advanced considering this was the late 80s. The suspension also got a nice working over with adjustable ride height and adjustable damping to help with higher speed dune charging or slower speed rock crawling. Although, of course, we're not talking about a ton of ground clearance. This isn't a Bronco or a Gladiator after all. Other little details include one of the world's first tire pressure monitoring systems and even run-flat tires, which would allow the 959 to continue racing even after suffering small punctures. Those are hollow spoke magnesium wheels, which are great for off-roading because they reduce unsprung weight and jostling when you're on uneven terrain, but they also allowed the 959 to achieve the title of the world's fastest production car when it became a road-going homologation special and achieved a top speed of 211 miles an hour. And capped off with a very nice day at Dakar in 1986 when the 959 took home 1st, 2nd, and 6th place overall. Porsche still owns 3 of the 6 959s that ever raced at Dakar for the factory team. 3 are in the hands of the general public, and 1 sold at a Porsche event in Atlanta for $5.95 million. Now, a normal 959, and normal is in huge quotation marks there, is probably worth more like $3 million today, and one that was totaled in a trailer rollover accident even almost cracked $1 million despite needing to be fully restored or parted out for the other owners of classic 959s. The 959 became so popular that Bill Gates even wanted one so bad that he lobbied the US government and led to the development of the show and display law, which leads to an exemption of the 25-year importation rule if you're not going to drive the car below 2,500 miles a year. Perhaps more important than the effect of the 959 on the collector car industry is how the 959 contributed to Porsche's evolution into one of the best automakers today. Some might say that the 959's next supercar sibling was the Carrera GT, but in fact by as early as the late 80s, the 964 already borrowed that all-wheel drive system for the Carrera 4. Then the 964 Turbo had rear-wheel drive. And then the 993 Turbo added turbos to an air-cooled flat six, but acquired all-wheel drive, which really helped with traction and helped Porsche deal with the Widowmaker moniker that had started with the 930 Turbo because its boost came on all at once and you would just break loose and people spun those things all day long. The 993 Turbo and Turbo S showed that that kind of radical power could be tamed in a rear-engine chassis with all-wheel drive. And then when Porsche introduced water cooling to the 911 for the 996 generation, the 996 Turbo became essentially a 959 supercar available to the general public. It produced 415 horsepower, which is a little less than the 959's 450, but more torque with 415 pound-feet. That allowed for a 0 to 60 time in the low 4-second range, and giving that twin turbo flat six a little bit of an ECU tune created the potential for even more power because of the incredible robustness of the M.S.R.P flat six, which retained a dry sump lubrication system as opposed to the base M96 engines that acquired dry sump lubrication for the rest of the 911 range that did not have GT in the name. The Carrera GT, Porsche's next supercar, about 15 years after the 959, can't really be thought of as a similar successor. Yeah, it's a Porsche and it's gorgeous and it's silver and it's got a cool rear wing, but it's got a water-cooled V10 and rear-wheel drive only, which again lent it something of a widowmaker reputation.
Yo! He's working out!
More in line with the 959's technological advancements, the 918 Spyder added things like hybridization to an all-wheel drive supercar bordering on hypercar performance. That really might be the true successor to the 959, although arguably the car behind me, the Porsche Cayenne, which debuted in the 955 generation in 2004, used a lot of the same stuff as the 959, and hey, 959, 955. The 955 was then succeeded by a 957 successor, 957, 959. This Cayenne Turbo, despite having a water-cooled V8, also dry sump lubrication, also twin turbos, also adjustable ride height, also adjustable dampers. It's got a locking center differential and was available with an optional locking rear differential and even electronically disconnecting sway bars front and rear, take that Jeep, as part of the advanced off-road package. Now my Cayenne Turbo only has the locking center differential, which is kind of a bummer, but really I'm not sure if I even want the added complexity of electronically disconnecting sway bars. I would like a rear locker, although the braking traction control settings on this thing make it pretty good off-road, and I've gotten both the front left and rear right tire fully off the ground, and it just cruises right up some of the rocky trails that I've taken it on. After the 957, the Cayenne and its Macan little sibling sort of lost a little bit of the off-road focus that arguably filtered down from the 959 20 years earlier. Unfortunately, they no longer have a true low-range transfer case, nor a locking center differential, and the air ride suspension does not include the same amount of height adjustability as the 955 and 957. Porsche still plays with a little bit of that rugged aesthetic with designs like the 911 Safari concept and the Mission E Cross Turismo, which eventually became the Taycan Cross Turismo. But really, they're not quite as impressive as the 959, the 955, or arguably the 918 Spyder. The world awaits Porsche's next legit flagship vehicle, and it will be electric. We all have to come to terms with that. But if they can combine the capability of the 959, look to their history with the Cayenne, and develop an electric drivetrain with all that instantaneous torque, there's a good chance that the spirit of the 959 could shine through. The Dakar Rally, meanwhile, gets held in South America now. Really, why it's still called Dakar is a pretty big question mark, but maybe Porsche will go back. Today, enthusiasts love to modify their classic and even water-cooled Porsches in the Safari tradition, though whether they actually want to go off-roading in them is a question, other than that famous Baja 911, which recently got back from battling in the desert. It's a really fun era for Porsche customization, and Porsche recognizes how much the enthusiast community supports sales from the showroom floor. So I wouldn't be surprised if some spiritual successor to the 959 arrives somewhat soon from Porsche. I hope you learned something about the 959, one of my very favorite cars ever to be built by one of my very favorite manufacturers, Porsche. Let us know in the comments if you want to learn about any more off-road legends in this video series. And in the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our channel before you sign off. It really helps us out. Thanks.